The rain was relentless, pounding against the cabin deep in the Appalachian wilderness, where I once thought I'd find peace. But instead, it became the backdrop to the nightmare I never saw coming. I woke to the distant rumble of thunder and the sharp crack of lightning, illuminating the empty side of the bed next to me. My heart sank even before I knew why. Cassandra, my wife of 10 years, had grown distant lately, her excuses more plentiful and her phone seemingly glued to her hand. At first, I chalked it up to stress. Long hours at work, managing our household, raising 2 kids together. But I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut, whispering that something was wrong. I had planned a special evening, a quiet celebration of our anniversary, just the 2 of us, far from the city and its distractions. This cabin was supposed to be a refuge, a reset. But here I was, standing alone in the storm, wondering why she wasn't in bed. I searched the cabin, my steps heavy on the creaky wooden floors. The living room was empty, save for the faint smell of her perfume lingering near the door. My pulse quickened as I noticed her coat missing from the rack. Outside, her car was gone. Pulling out my phone, I saw a single notification. A text from Cassandra sent hours earlier. Don't wait up. I'll be back soon. The storm outside mirrored the one brewing in my chest. I called her, but the line went straight to voicemail. Panic turned to frustration, then to suspicion. I remembered the hushed phone calls, the way she pulled away when I tried to ask what was wrong. And then, like a puzzle piece sliding into place, I realized where she might be, or worse, who she might be with. The name Sebastian flashed through my mind like a warning. Her new boss, who always seemed too charming, too interested in her life outside the office. She'd laugh off my concerns, calling me paranoid or jealous. But now, as the storm outside raged, I couldn't shake the image of them together. Grabbing my keys, I stormed into the night, determined to find her and get answers. The rain made the drive treacherous, my windshield wipers struggling to keep up with the sheets of water battering the car. Every mile felt like an eternity, my grip on the wheel tightening with every turn. I didn't even know exactly where I was going, just a gut feeling driving me forward. My mind raced, replaying every moment over the past few months that suddenly seemed like warning signs. The late nights at work. The way she smiled at her phone but locked it when I came near. Her newfound enthusiasm for team-building retreats. I'd been so willing to give her the benefit of the doubt, to trust that the woman I'd built a life with would never betray me. But now, with every flash of lightning illuminating the dark, twisting road ahead, that trust felt like a distant memory. A name kept echoing in my head. Sebastian. He'd hosted an office party last spring, and she insisted I come along to meet her colleagues. I remember shaking his hand, his smile a little too wide, his grip a little too firm. "You've got a great woman here," he'd said, clapping me on the shoulder. I'd smiled politely, but something about the way he looked at her felt off. That night, she laughed at all his jokes, even the ones that weren't funny. My stomach churned as I remembered how she'd defended him when I brought it up later. "You're overthinking it," she'd said, rolling her eyes. "He's my boss, Gabriel. Be nice. Be nice." Those words felt like a punch to the gut now. As I reached a fork in the road, the thought hit me, what if I was wrong? What if I was letting my imagination run wild, fueled by the storm and my insecurities? But then again, what if I wasn't? The weight of not knowing was unbearable. I turned left, following the faint glow of lights in the distance. My gut told me I was getting close, and my heart pounded with the force of a drumbeat. This wasn't just about where she was, it was about the foundation of our life together. My phone buzzed on the seat next to me, and I glanced down. A text from Cassandra. "Stop. Don't come here." It was all the confirmation I needed. Whatever she was doing, wherever she was, she didn't want me to see it. That only made me press harder on the gas. The cabin came into view, its warm light spilling out into the stormy night. Her car was parked out front. I pulled up behind it and killed the engine. For a moment, I sat there, gripping the steering wheel as the rain pounded against the roof. My mind screamed at me to turn around, to leave before I saw something I couldn't unsee. But I couldn't. Not after all we'd been through. Not after everything we'd built together. If this was the truth, I had to face it. I stepped out of the car, rain soaking through my clothes in seconds. With every step toward the cabin door, my chest tightened. My worst fears were about to be confirmed. I stood outside the cabin door, drenched to the bone, my heart pounding in time with the storm. Through the rain-speckled window, I saw movement, a shadow crossing the warm glow inside. My breath caught in my throat as I strained to hear voices muffled by the wind. For a brief moment, I hesitated. Did I really want to do this? To rip open the veil of ignorance and see what lay behind it? The answer came quickly. Yes. I had to know. I raised my fist and knocked, the sound sharp and deliberate against the doorframe. It took a few moments before the door creaked open. Cassandra stood there, her face pale, her hair damp as if she'd been caught in the rain too. She looked at me with wide, startled eyes, her lips parting as though to speak, but no words came out. Behind her, I saw him, Sebastian. He was leaning casually against the kitchen counter, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, a glass of red wine in his hand. He didn't even flinch when he saw me. Instead, he raised the glass slightly, like he was toasting me. My jaw tightened. "Gabriel," Cassandra began, her voice trembling. "You shouldn't be here." "That's funny," I said, stepping into the cabin without waiting for an invitation. "Because I think this is exactly where I need to be." The warmth of the cabin hit me like a slap, a stark contrast to the icy storm outside. Cassandra moved to block my path, but I sidestepped her, my eyes locked on Sebastian. He watched me with a calmness that made my blood boil, like he was enjoying the show. "Nice place," I said, my voice low and steady, though every fiber of my being screamed to lash out. "Cozy. Romantic. Just the two of you?" Cassandra stepped between us, her hands out as if she could physically keep me from tearing into him. "Gabriel, it's not what it looks like." "Not what it looks like?" I echoed, laughing bitterly. "Then tell me, Cassandra, what exactly does this look like to you? Because from where I'm standing, it's pretty damn clear." Sebastian finally spoke, his voice dripping with smugness. "You should calm down, Gabriel. This is all just a misunderstanding." "Stay out of this," I snapped, pointing a finger at him. "This is between me and my wife." He smirked, taking another sip of wine. "Your wife? She doesn't seem so sure about that." The room fell silent except for the sound of rain hammering against the windows. Cassandra's eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sympathy. "Not now. Not after this." "How long?" I demanded, my voice breaking. "How long has this been going on?" Cassandra looked down at the floor, her silence answering the question better than any words could. My fists clenched at my sides as I turned to Sebastian. "You think you can just waltz in and take what's mine?" I growled, stepping closer. "Is that how you justify this to yourself?" "Take," he said, setting his glass down with an infuriatingly casual air. "She came to me, Gabriel. You can't take something that was freely given." That was it. Something inside me snapped. Before I could stop myself, I lunged at him, shoving him back against the counter. His smug demeanor faltered as I gripped his collar, my knuckles white with rage. "Gabriel, stop," Cassandra cried, pulling at my arm. But I didn't let go. "Look me in the eye and tell me you didn't plan this," I hissed at Sebastian, my face inches from his. "Tell me you didn't see an opportunity and take it." To his credit, he didn't flinch. But there was no denying the flicker of fear in his eyes. "Maybe you should ask her," he said, his voice tight. "She's the one who made the choice." That stung more than his words should have. Slowly, I let go, stepping back and turning to Cassandra. She stood there trembling, her face streaked with tears. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "I came here to save us, Cassandra," I said, my voice hoarse. "But it looks like I'm too late." The storm outside raged on, but the silence in the cabin was deafening. The silence stretched, unbearable, before Cassandra finally spoke. "Gabriel, it's complicated," she said, her voice so faint I almost didn't hear her over the storm. Complicated. That one word felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. The woman who had laughed with me over burnt pancakes on Sunday mornings, who had held my hand in the delivery room when our first child was born, now stood there with tears in her eyes, but none of them were for me. "Complicated," I repeated, my voice cold and even. "You made it simple the second you walked into this cabin." She stepped forward, reaching for me. Gabriel, please. Just listen. No, I cut her off, backing away. I've done nothing but listen, Cassandra. I've listened to excuse after excuse. But I'm done now. Sebastian, still leaning against the counter, gave a small, mocking chuckle. Well, this has been fun, but maybe you two should take this outside. You know, before you break something. I turned to him, my anger surging again. You should thank your lucky stars I don't break you. The words came out sharper than I intended, but they carried the weight of all the betrayal burning inside me. Gabriel, stop, Cassandra said, stepping between us again. Just go. Please. Go. I said, laughing bitterly. You want me to leave so you can what? Stay here with him. My voice cracked at the end, and I hated myself for it. I was supposed to be stronger than this, but right now, I felt like a man unraveling at the seams. Just go, she repeated, her eyes pleading. For a moment, I considered staying, fighting, demanding answers. But what good would it do? No explanation could undo what I'd seen tonight. The damage was done. Without another word, I turned on my heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind me. The rain hit me like a wall, cold and unrelenting, soaking through my clothes as I stumbled back to my car. My hands trembled as I fumbled for the keys, my mind racing with fragments of memories, each one more painful than the last. The drive back was a blur, the wipers struggling to keep up with the storm. I could barely see the road ahead, but it didn't matter. My vision was clouded by tears I didn't even realize I was shedding. Cassandra's voice echoed in my mind, the way she'd said my name when she opened the door. Soft. Hesitant. Guilty. The way she didn't deny what was happening, didn't fight for us the way I would have. And Sebastian, his smirk, his nonchalance, the way he acted like this was just another game. The memory made my grip on the wheel tighten until my knuckles ached. As I pulled into our driveway, the house loomed dark and empty, its windows glistening with rain. It felt like a monument to the life I thought I had, a life that now felt like a lie. I sat there for a long time, the engine still running, the rain drumming against the roof. I couldn't bring myself to go inside. Not yet. Instead, I rested my head against the steering wheel and let out a shuddering breath. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm inside me. When I finally stepped inside, the quiet hit me like a punch. The house that once held laughter and life felt hollow, each creak of the floor echoing like a reminder of what was lost. I kicked off my soaked shoes and stood in the foyer, staring at the pictures lining the walls, snapshots of our family's happiest moments. There was one of Cassandra holding our youngest, her eyes bright with joy. Another of us at the beach, her hand resting on my shoulder as the kids built sandcastles. They looked so genuine back then. But now, they felt like decorations in a museum dedicated to a life I no longer recognized. I wandered into the kitchen, my body moving on autopilot. I poured a glass of water and leaned against the counter, staring blankly at the fridge covered in our kids' drawings and school schedules. The weight of everything pressed down on me, suffocating. Her betrayal wasn't just about what happened tonight. It was the culmination of months, maybe years, of lies. Lies that were built right here in this house, while I was none the wiser. The sound of the rain outside filled the silence as I let the events of the evening replay in my mind. Her text, "Don't come here." The look on her face when she opened the door. Sebastian's smug grin. My chest tightened, anger and hurt swirling into something heavier. A creak on the stairs broke my thoughts. I turned to see Lily, our youngest, clutching her stuffed bunny, her small face peeking around the banister. "Daddy," she whispered. Her voice was soft, unsure. "Why are you home so late?" I froze, my heart breaking a little more at the sight of her. How do you explain something like this to a child? How do you tell your daughter that the person she looks up to most in the world has shattered the family you built together? My voice cracked and I cleared my throat. "I just got caught in the storm, sweetie. Go back to bed. It's late." She hesitated, then nodded, her little feet padding back up the stairs. I stood there, gripping the counter until my knuckles turned white, fighting the urge to scream. This wasn't just my pain. It was hers, too. And Marcus's. And Danny's. They didn't know it yet, but their world was about to change. I made my way to the living room and sank into the couch, the exhaustion finally catching up with me. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Cassandra and Sebastian in that cabin. Heard her voice saying, "It's complicated." Felt the icy realization that I hadn't just lost my wife, I'd lost the illusion of who she was. Hours passed, the storm outside gradually fading to a soft drizzle. The house remained eerily quiet, save for the occasional creak of the old wood. At some point, I must have drifted off, because the next thing I knew, pale morning light was streaming through the curtains. But the clarity of morning brought no relief. If anything, it made everything sharper, more real. I had to decide what to do next, for myself and for the kids. I couldn't let this destroy me, no matter how much it hurt. Somehow, I had to pick up the pieces. But where do you even start when the life you built has been torn apart? The next morning was a haze of routine masking chaos. I got the kids ready for school like nothing was wrong. Lily wanted braids in her hair, and Marcus complained about the cereal choices. Danny, our eldest, sat quietly, his eyes darting between me and the front door like he could sense something was off. "Where's Mom?" he finally asked, breaking the uneasy silence. "She's out," I replied quickly, not trusting myself to say more. "She'll be back later." I hated lying to them, but how could I drop this on their shoulders? They deserved better than being caught in the crossfire of their parents' broken trust. After they left for school, I stood in the doorway for a long time, watching the bus disappear down the street. It wasn't until the house was completely still again that I realized how much I'd been holding in. The anger, the heartbreak, it all crashed over me in waves, leaving me gripping the doorframe for support. I couldn't stay here, not surrounded by the memories of what used to be. Grabbing my jacket, I got into the car and started driving, no destination in mind. The rain had stopped, leaving the road slick and the sky heavy with gray clouds. I ended up at the park, the one Cassandra and I used to take the kids to when they were little. The swings creaked in the wind, and the slide glistened with leftover rain. It felt strange, sitting on that same bench where we'd once laughed and talked about our future, now consumed by a betrayal I couldn't wrap my head around. Pulling out my phone, I opened her last text again. "Stop. Don't come here." It was almost laughable, how small those words were compared to the weight they carried. I stared at them, wondering what had gone through her mind when she sent them. Did she think she could keep this from me forever? Did she even care? I typed out a message before I could stop myself. "We need to talk." I stared at it for a long time before hitting send. Part of me wanted her to ignore it, to stay silent so I could keep building my anger into a wall to protect myself. But another part of me, one I hated to admit was still there, wanted answers. Closure. Maybe even a reason to believe we could fix this, though I doubted that more with every passing minute. Her reply came quickly. "I'll come home tonight. We'll talk then." I laughed bitterly, shoving the phone back into my pocket. Tonight? As if this could wait. As if I'd sit around twiddling my thumbs while she figured out how to spin her story. Still, I knew I'd wait. Because for all my anger, for all the betrayal, I needed to hear it from her. I needed to know why. The rest of the day dragged by in a fog. I went through the motions, running errands, tidying the house, anything to keep my mind occupied. But every quiet moment brought it all rushing back. The cabin. Sebastian. Her face when she saw me. When the kids came home, I plastered on a smile, helped with homework, and made dinner like it was any other day. They didn't need to know, not yet. But as the hours ticked by and the clock edged closer to the time she said she'd return, the knot in my stomach tightened. I wasn't ready for this confrontation, but I couldn't avoid it either. Tonight, I'd get my answers. And after that, I had no idea. The sound of her car pulling into the driveway was like a thunderclap, loud and jarring against the quiet of the house. I sat in the living room, the TV on but muted, staring at the door. My hands rested on my knees, clenched into fists, as I tried to keep my breathing steady. The door creaked open, and there she was. Cassandra stepped inside, her face pale and drawn. She looked at me, then quickly away, like she couldn't stand to meet my eyes. "I told the kids you'd be home late from work," I said, my voice cold and controlled. "They're in bed now." "Gabriel," she began, but I held up a hand. "Don't. Just don't." I stood, my height towering over her as she lingered by the door. I've been waiting all day for this. For you to come in here and explain to me how our entire life together ended up meaning nothing to you. Her lips trembled, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But then her expression hardened, and she squared her shoulders. It's not like that, she said quietly. Then tell me what it is like, I shot back, stepping closer. Tell me why you've been sneaking off with Sebastian while I've been here, holding everything together. Tell me how you could look me in the eye every day and lie to my face. She looked away, her fingers twisting the strap of her purse. It wasn't supposed to happen, Gabriel. I didn't plan for any of this. Didn't plan it? I repeated, my voice rising. That's your excuse? You didn't plan it, so it just happened? Do you have any idea what you've done? To me? To the kids? She flinched at that, and for a fleeting moment, I saw guilt flicker in her eyes. But then it was gone, replaced by something colder. You don't understand, she said, her tone defensive now. You're always so predictable, so steady. I felt like I was suffocating. Suffocating? I said, my anger boiling over. You're telling me that the life we built together, the family we raised, was suffocating you? It wasn't about the family, she snapped, finally looking at me. It was about us. About me. I needed something more. I stared at her, the weight of her words settling over me like a stone. More. I said, my voice quiet now. I gave you everything, Cassandra. Everything. And it wasn't enough. She looked down, silent. You've destroyed us, I said, the finality of it hitting me as the words left my mouth. And for what? For him. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence was enough. I turned away, running a hand through my hair as I paced the room. The anger, the heartbreak, it was all too much. I want you to leave, I said finally, my voice low and steady. What? She said, her eyes widening. You heard me. Leave. Tonight, I said, turning back to her. I don't care where you go, but you're not staying here. Not after this. She opened her mouth to argue, but then closed it again, her shoulders slumping. Without another word, she turned and headed up the stairs. I heard her moving around, packing a bag, and then the soft thud of her footsteps as she came back down. At the door, she paused, glancing back at me. I'm sorry, Gabriel, she said, her voice trembling. Sorry doesn't fix this, I said, not looking at her. The door closed softly behind her, and I was alone again. Alone in the house we'd built together, surrounded by the echoes of a life that was no longer mine. When the door clicked shut behind her, it left a silence so thick I could feel it pressing against my chest. I stood there, staring at the spot where Cassandra had been, the faint scent of her perfume still lingering in the air. It used to be comforting, familiar. Now, it was a bitter reminder of everything that had just unraveled. I sat back down on the couch, my body heavy like I'd run a marathon. I wanted to feel something, relief, anger, even sadness, but instead, there was just emptiness. The kind of emptiness that settles in your bones and makes you question if you'll ever feel whole again. The house was still, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the walls as they settled. I looked around the living room, my eyes falling on the small details I'd never really noticed before. The blanket draped over the armchair that Cassandra always used, the kids' shoes neatly lined up by the door, the stack of unopened mail on the counter. Everything was exactly where it should be, yet nothing felt right anymore. The realization hit me all over again. She was gone. The woman I'd shared a decade of my life with had walked out, taking the life we'd built together and leaving behind this hollow shell. I thought of the kids upstairs, sleeping soundly, unaware that everything had just changed. How was I going to tell them? How do you break your children's hearts without shattering your own? I stood up and walked to the kitchen, needing something to do, anything to distract myself. The dishes from dinner were still in the sink, so I rolled up my sleeves and started washing them, letting the warm water and the scent of soap fill the void. It was mindless, mechanical, but it kept my hands busy and gave my mind a momentary reprieve from the storm raging inside it. Halfway through scrubbing a plate, I stopped and stared out the window above the sink. The rain had finally stopped, leaving everything outside drenched and glistening under the faint glow of the streetlights. It should have been peaceful, but all I could see was her car pulling out of the driveway, her taillights disappearing into the night. I shook my head, setting the plate down and drying my hands. I couldn't keep thinking about her, about what she'd done. It wouldn't change anything. What I needed now was clarity, a plan for what came next. I walked back into the living room and grabbed my phone from the coffee table. My first instinct was to call someone, maybe my mom or my best friend Nate, but I hesitated. What would I even say? That my wife had been cheating on me and was now God knows where with her boss? That I'd kicked her out and was left trying to figure out how to pick up the pieces? Instead, I opened my contacts and scrolled aimlessly, my thumb hovering over names but never pressing down. Everyone in my life seemed too far away to understand, too removed to help. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly, utterly alone. I leaned back on the couch and stared at the ceiling, the white paint cracked in one corner from a leak we'd fixed years ago. I'd always meant to repaint it but never got around to it. Now, it seemed like the least important thing in the world. Time passed in a blur, the hours slipping away as I sat there, lost in thought. At some point, I must have dozed off, because I woke to the sound of the clock chiming 3 in the morning. My neck ached from the awkward angle, and the room was pitch black except for the faint glow of the streetlights filtering through the curtains. I got up and made my way upstairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. The kids' doors were closed, and I paused for a moment outside each one, listening to their soft breathing. It was a small comfort, knowing they were still here, still mine. In my own room, the bed looked massive and empty. I stood at the foot of it, staring at the rumpled covers where she used to sleep. The thought of lying down in it made my stomach churn. Instead, I grabbed a spare blanket from the closet and headed back downstairs to the couch. As I settled in, the house seemed to close in around me, its silence no longer just empty but oppressive. I pulled the blanket over myself and closed my eyes, willing sleep to come. But it didn't. Instead, I lay there, wide awake, staring into the darkness and wondering how I was going to face tomorrow. Tomorrow, when the kids would ask where she was. Tomorrow, when the reality of what had happened would still be here, waiting for me. Tomorrow, when I'd have to start figuring out how to live a life I no longer recognized. The sunlight creeping through the curtains wasn't welcome. I blinked against it, groggy and aching from a night spent on the couch. The heaviness in my chest hadn't lifted. If anything, it had settled deeper. It wasn't just a bad dream, this was my life now. I forced myself to get up, the house unnervingly quiet. Normally, I'd hear the kids shuffling around upstairs, or Cassandra moving through her morning routine, the soft clink of her coffee mug. But today, the silence was deafening. I stood in the kitchen, staring blankly at the coffee pot before deciding against it. I wasn't ready to face the day with the kids just yet. Instead, I grabbed a glass of water and leaned against the counter, staring out the window. Then came the sound I dreaded. Small footsteps on the stairs. Marcus, our middle child, was the first to appear, his hair sticking up in all directions. He rubbed his eyes and looked at me, confused. "Dad? Why are you down here?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. I forced a smile. "Just couldn't sleep," I said. "Go sit down. I'll make breakfast." He nodded, shuffling toward the table as Lily came bounding down behind him, her stuffed bunny dragging on the floor. "Where's Mommy?" she asked, her question innocent, but it hit like a punch. "She had to leave early," I said, keeping my voice steady. "She'll be back later." The lie felt bitter on my tongue, but I couldn't tell them the truth. Not yet. How do you tell your kids their mother left, not for work, not for errands, but because the life you all shared wasn't enough for her anymore? By the time Danny joined us, the table was set, and breakfast was ready. Pancakes, scrambled eggs, the works. My attempt to keep things feeling normal. But nothing about this morning was normal. Danny watched me closely as we ate, his sharp eyes picking up on everything I was trying to hide. He wasn't a little kid anymore. At 14, he understood more than I wanted him to. "Are you okay, Dad?" he asked quietly, once Lily and Marcus were too busy arguing over syrup to notice. "Yeah," I lied, meeting his gaze. "Just a long night." He didn't look convinced, but he didn't press. After breakfast, I sent them upstairs to get ready for school, taking a moment to lean against the counter and catch my breath. The truth was, I wasn't okay. I was barely holding it together, and the weight of what lay ahead felt crushing. When the kids finally left for the bus, I stood in the doorway, watching them go. Danny turned back once, giving me a look I couldn't quite read. Concern? Suspicion? I didn't know. As the bus disappeared down the street, I closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling a shaky breath. It was just me now. Me and the mess Cassandra had left behind. I walked back into the living room and sat down, the quiet of the house wrapping around me like a shroud. My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. What was I supposed to do next? How was I going to raise 3 kids while dealing with the fallout of her betrayal? And worst of all, how was I going to tell them the truth? The phone buzzed on the coffee table, pulling me from my thoughts. I reached for it, half hoping it was Cassandra, but it wasn't. It was my best friend, Nate. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. "Hey," I said, my voice sounding hoarse even to me. "Gabriel," Nate said, his tone immediately concerned. "What's going on? You didn't sound right when we talked last week, and now you're dodging my texts. You okay?" I hesitated. The words felt too big, too heavy to say out loud. But I needed someone to know. Someone who wasn't part of this house, this chaos. "No," I admitted finally, my voice cracking. "I'm not okay." And with that, everything spilled out. The cabin, Sebastian, the fight, the kids. Every detail I'd been holding in poured out like a flood. And Nate listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was silence on the other end of the line. "Gabriel," he said eventually, his voice low. "I don't even know what to say, man. That's a lot." "Yeah," I said, leaning forward and rubbing my temples. "It is. You don't have to figure it all out today," he said. "Take it one step at a time. Start with the kids. They need you, man." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. He was right, of course. The kids came first. They always would. "I'll be there for whatever you need," Nate added. "Just say the word." "Thanks," I said, my voice soft. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone in my hands. Nate was right. I couldn't fix everything at once. But I could take the first step. And the first step was figuring out how to protect my kids from the fallout of something they didn't cause, but would have to live through. The day dragged on, a heavy cloud over everything. I busied myself with chores around the house, trying to make sense of what felt like a fractured reality. By the time the kids came home from school, I'd decided, no more half-truths, no more dodging. They deserved honesty, even if it wasn't the whole story. Dinner was quieter than usual. Danny picked at his food, his gaze darting between me and his siblings. Marcus, ever the chatterbox, filled the silence with stories from school, while Lily doodled on her napkin with a crayon. When the plates were cleared and the dishwasher hummed in the background, I called them to the couch. The 3 of them sat side by side, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease. I took a seat in the armchair across from them, my hands clasped tightly in front of me. "Kids," I began, my voice steady but soft, "there's something I need to talk to you about." Their eyes widened, and I could see the worry creeping in. I took a deep breath and continued. "Mom's not going to be staying here for a while," I said. We've been having some problems, and she needs some time away to think things through." Lily's lip quivered, her tiny hands clutching her stuffed bunny. "Is it our fault?" she asked, her voice so small it almost broke me. "No," I said firmly, leaning forward. "It's not your fault. It has nothing to do with you 3. Your mom and I love you so much, and that's never going to change. Do you understand?" Marcus nodded slowly, though his brow furrowed in confusion. Danny, however, met my gaze with a question of his own. "Is she coming back?" he asked, his tone measured, almost too mature for his age. I hesitated, searching for the right words. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But no matter what happens, I promise you this. I'll always be here for you. Always." They sat quietly for a moment, processing. Then Lily climbed onto my lap, wrapping her arms around my neck. "Don't leave us, Daddy," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, holding her close. After tucking them into bed, I returned to the living room and sank onto the couch. The house was quiet again, but this time it felt less suffocating. There was clarity in the air, a sense of direction, even if the path ahead was uncertain. As I sat there, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a text from Cassandra, Can I come by tomorrow to see the kids? I stared at the message, my chest tightening. Part of me wanted to say no, to shield them from the confusion and pain her presence would bring. But they loved her. No matter what she'd done to me, she was still their mother. Come by after school, I typed back. Just for an hour. I set the phone down and leaned back, closing my eyes. The road ahead would be hard, but tonight I'd taken the first steps. I didn't know if I could ever forgive Cassandra, or if the life we'd built could be salvaged. But I knew one thing for sure. My kids were my anchor now. As I drifted off to sleep, the storm outside had long passed, leaving the air crisp and still. In the darkness, I found a small glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start again.